Hi, my name is Ray Watson with Moose Mods, and we want to give you a good walk-around introduction to the Bull Moose today. Basically, the Moose is a Murphy kit-built aircraft developed out of Chilliwack, BC, a really good, rugged, good reputation airframe, which is what I chose to use for my backcountry bird. And we've done the design and development on the use of an LS3 engine package, and you'll see more of that in another video and some stills that we have on our website as well. But anyway, wanted to get started here and kind of start with the signature of this airplane, which is its nose. It's got a beautiful, long, very aerodynamic cowling. That was very purposeful to see what we could do to increase airspeed. That airspeed wasn't the big challenge and the big objective, but certainly something we wanted to improve, and it's done that and then some. So anyway, we're driving a large three-bladed Hartzell prop, very deep chord to the blade, and we're pulling just under 1,300 pounds of thrust on some of our tests. You'll see here an intake scoop for our oil cooler, and thankfully that size is doing a great job to keep us nice and cool on our oil temps on warm days, climb outs, etc. We see very little variation on that. And then below is the primary air intake for our cooling system, and in there you'll see the radiator and a thermostatically controlled fan that doesn't actually operate all that much on a warm day after flight. You'll hear it running for a few minutes after flight, but that's about all that it seems to do. And then we have some NACA scoops I've installed in the side of the cowling on both sides. The objective there was to throw some colder air in around the headers just to help again keep the interior area as cool as we can. And then basically our overall cooling is what's considered to be an updraft system. And the formula for that is that we want about 150% of exit air from the intake cooling air. And we have that, or perhaps even a little bit more. And I built and molded these double gills on both sides of the cowling. And interestingly enough, you can actually see a fair amount of the engine from the backside as part of pre-flight if you want to look around. So that's turned out great. And then we have our 4-into-1 headers. Those are doing nicely for us. They're wrapped and insulated. You'll see that on a different video of the engine compartment itself. But it's a 4-into-1 header to minimize a lot of the exhaust tubing inside and try to keep some of our temperatures down, and that seems to be working very well, so quite pleased with that. The landing gear is stock Murphy Moose. Nice big wide tall spring gear, and currently you'll see we have double puck brakes on it. Does a nice job stopping this. And then I'm running just 26-inch Goodyear tires that for my purposes serve me very well. I live on a paved airstrip, so I don't want to be eating up bush tires particularly, but by the same token, I keep thinking about 31s, so you might see those on here one of these days. But for the kind of flying I do, these serve me very, very well. Then we have basically a stock Murphy Moose wing. I did put a heated pitot in there just for the occasional light IFR I might want to do. I've also installed some LED lights for taxi and landing. I have one of each on each wing. Then we have the extended Murphy wing tips as well. So nothing special with any of that. That's all pretty much stock Moose. Now the other thing I did, and a few other fellows have done this as well, is I built and installed some gull wing doors. I really like the ease of access and egress that they provide, especially in the backcountry. And then the other thing I've done, and I should have showed you this first perhaps, is that I've also installed glass on the lower section. And that literally allows me to see straight down inside of the tire, so in flight I have excellent downward visibility, and then certainly that's handy on the ground as well. So lots of good easy access there. And then this is the primary baggage door that exposes a huge cavernous cockpit area. I'm 10 feet on the floor from firewall to this rear bulkhead. And as you see, I have just 2 seats installed at the moment, which is my typical configuration. I've had 4 in here, and then we can load just an awful lot of stuff. And the useful load is approximately 1,500 pounds. And the nice thing with how this has turned out with the positioning of the engine and propeller is that I'm right at my forward CG limit with myself and 15 pounds of fuel. So the beauty of that for backcountry operation is we have a very deep area for loading and it's still remaining within our center of gravity limits. So we're in really good shape there. I have a little bit of a drip rail up here. I'll show you one on the other side for the other baggage access area. But that holds, that helps a lot sometimes if you're out in inclement weather. And then let me just show you ease of access here. I had just one of these connectors on this door, this panel. But that opens up into another 3 feet of baggage area. And that is mainly used for lighter things, sleeping bags, etc., etc. And then up above, you'll notice where I've mounted in a ladder so that, as I frequently do, is carry additional fuel in the backcountry, then I've got a way to get up to my pretty tall wings and get that loaded on board. The standard capacity for fuel on the Moose is 80 gallons. I frequently carry an additional 30 or 40 gallons in the backcountry and just offload those in camp and then have some good fuel to get back home with as required. You'll see some of the standard rivet lines here on these wraps. And what I've done, you can't see it from the outside, but we'll show you some additional photos on the inside. I ran some additional 3/4 inch channel down here and through here and on this bottom wrap to give more rigidity, because these skins are a bit on the light side, and in a lot of rougher operations there's been some damage show up, so I wanted to really strengthen that considerably. And then you'll see this double rivet line is carrying some hat channel down the inside of the fuselage. And then this double rivet line here runs a reinforced spine to give some strength there. And then I ran some similar channel underneath the dorsal so that this whole area on top and on all sides has a lot more longitudinal support. And then I did a different skin down here. So wrap this up forward of the normal seam point on that bulkhead, came forward to carry that a little bit more strength. And then I've designed this strut brace for the horizontal stabilizer. One of the things I've noticed on a number of Moose and some Super Rebels is that because this is a very wide platform, I think it's again a little over 11 feet, and it's mounted on a 7-inch wide platform, there can be a lot of flexing here, and so I've seen a lot of cracking in the fairings. That was concerning me, so I've attached this to a bulkhead on the fuselage side and to the forward spar on the stabilizer side. To be very candid, there's some controversy about strut braces on these. I've actually had some interesting conversations with Daryl Murphy about that. And I've had no issues with it whatsoever. One of the concerns has been flexing this way and the potential for triggering some flutter, but that hasn't been an issue. So we're going to keep an eye on that, but that has been a very happy addition thus far to really help strengthen that whole area. You'll see here on top of this elevator skin some doublers that come out here and up here. Those are basically the Moose add-ons over and above the Super Rebel to give some more strength to that. We've done some additional nicely machined hinges with ball bearings in them for these hinge point surfaces, and those are working nicely. Same on the rudder. But this is balanced all surfaces, especially because of the additional speeds that we're getting. We just didn't want any concern about any potential for flutter. Very smooth elevator control. One of the things I've discovered that in terms of flying this airplane smoothly and well is that it really likes to be led with a rudder and a turn. Otherwise it can be a little heavy on the aileron controls, but when you do that, and I frankly had some getting used to accomplish that, then things work very nicely. Then about the only difference on this side is this secondary small baggage door. Most Moose don't have this. I elected to incorporate this into mine, and again gives a nice area for additional storage. And then that rear panel comes out with 4 screws to allow for good inspection access. Also a drip rail here just in case of inclement weather. That helps. And then obviously all the same reinforcing inside of the structure on this side as well. Then you can see on the panel all of the basic steam gauges. And then you'll notice that I have a throttle, a prop control, which yes, it is red instead of blue. I was out in the field and I had the other one fail, and the red was the only one I could get to replace it. But you'll also notice the fuel mixture control with a red background. It's a little micro adjustment, rarely ever used. That's just in case you want to tweak things a little bit during flight. Everything else is programmed in, and just very seamless from takeoff to climb to cruise. I don't touch that at all. And then underneath the panel on the pilot side, you'll see the SDS box that drives fuel management and all the ignition. So that's right up underneath in there. And then the computer that is programmable is up on the right side of the instrument panel. And it's not on at the moment, but we'll have some in-flight videos where we can demonstrate what that's doing. And there's a screen gauge there that will show manifold pressure, RPM, cowling temperature, cooling temperature, so that's the one I keep on most of the time. You'll also notice I've got the battery underneath the co-pilot seat. Again, wanted easy access if jumping ever became required. And I've had no issues again with weight and balance with that far forward. So that has again also worked out well. Well, now that we removed the cowling, I wanted to do a walk around and give you a good idea of this installation for this LS3 engine. And this one is the 480 horse version. We have two others we're making available, one the 430, the other the 525. But they're basically going to be identical installs with the exception of the engine mount, and I'll explain that here in just a moment or so. But let me give you an idea of a few of the features. You can see on the firewall we have all of our fuel plumbing, including this Borla fuel pressure regulator, and there is a very precise number where that needs to be set for efficient running of this particular engine. And then you'll see also further down inside of the firewall we've got our two electric pumps, and we have our they're powered up by individual selective switches. And I'll explain more about that later too when we do some view of the cockpit area. The 4130 steel tubing engine mount is sturdy. One thing I won't do again is powder coat that. Powder coating looks nice, but what I don't care for, frankly, is the fact that there is some cracking that occurs on the powder coat, and you can't tell if it's cracking on the powder coat or the engine mount or a weld. We haven't had any weld problems, but I'm going to just do an epoxy coating on those from here on out. Then we've used some preformed silicone hoses, really good T-clamps. You see all the threaded ends are protected with caps. And then there are some very specific requirements for the pressure caps in terms of the PSI function for the LS engine. So through some trial and error, we got that all sorted out. Then you'll also see, as far as the cooling, not only the formed silicone hoses, which I like, but we've used this flex metal tubing. I like that not only in that it's easy to install because it does flex, but it gives some kind of radiating capacity to add to the cooling effect for our coolant. Very predominantly here, you'll see our 4-into-1 header. Probably three reasons that I decided on that. Honestly, the first was probably the cool factor, because they do look kind of neat here, sticking out of the cowling and have that very turbine look to them. But the other thing is that I wanted to minimize a lot of the exhaust pipe inside the cowling just to mitigate as much heat buildup as possible, and it has been effective for that. And then as you can see, we've wrapped that with asbestos tape. One of the things that occurred early on in flight testing was, even though I had the original spark plugs covered in with a protective sleeve, still managed to fry one of those given the proximity to the header. So what I've done here is installed some really high quality plug wires that themselves have a titanium sleeve on them that give over 1,000 degrees of protection. Then I've added a secondary sleeve. So between the internal wire, this sleeve, and the wrap on the headers, we've got about 3,000 degrees of protection, which is far more than enough, but I just like to do overkill there. As long as we're looking at this piece of the engine, let's take a look at the coils. For those of us that have been involved in general aviation a long time, the idea of redundancy is really important. And so in approaching this particular project, that certainly was looked at long and hard. And also had to recognize that with this LS engine, there's really a different approach to redundancy here. You'll see that each of the cylinders has its own coil, its own plug wire, a single plug to each cylinder. And that provides a great deal of a different type of redundancy that I'm choosing to be very comfortable with in terms of giving a reliable system. And to speak to that point, when I did fry that one plug wire early on in flight testing, it was basically not providing juice to that plug, but all that I felt was just the slightest little miss, nothing outrageous or difficult at all. So the impact of losing a cylinder is really minimal. You'll also see up here kind of changing directions. These are the fuel return lines coming in and out of the fuel rail. This is a pressure sensor on the fuel rail that gives a PSI reading, and again we have a very determined amount of PSI that needs to be generated in that system, and then that PSI is monitored there, but it's controlled again back to the Borla where it's mechanically adjusted. Again, back to the engine mount just for a second. This won't change in our other applications with one exception. I think what we're going to be doing is modifying the V-brace up in the cockpit and bringing it down to attach directly to the engine mount. Mainly that is for float applications where there's a lot of impact potential there. But I think it's going to be a good idea just for all of our applications as well. So this is going to be redesigned on the back end up to the cockpit area, but all of this is going to stay as is. It's working very, very well. We have a remote oil filter for a couple of reasons. I wanted to be able to keep good clearances here because you can see in this area on the oil pan that indentation is where the standard oil filter will fit. And by the way, this is a replacement oil pan to accommodate for our cooling system and keeping things close and tight in there. And that oil filter was pretty shallow and small. So part of the motivation behind moving over here to a remote filter was to provide a larger filter and add some additional capacity. So my oil capacity at this point with this new pan and the extra lines and the oil cooler, which is here, is right at about 7 quarts. And the last oil change at 25 hours, I just simply did not use a drop. So it's that part's working very well. Oil temperatures remain, very stable with this oil cooler. And we'll see a little bit of rise in a long warm day climb, but probably only 10-15 degrees. And it's consistently at about 160 right in there. So that's doing well. Typical Lord mounts here. Then this is the Pto Mount for the prop governor, which is controlling our Hartzell constant speed hydraulic prop. This is a feed line that comes from the hydraulic pump. The prop governor goes into the back of the PSRU case into the prop shaft. So then the hydraulic fluid runs all the way through here and controls the blade angle. This PSRU is built by Firewall Forward Aero Engines. The original tag says Sydney, BC, but they're now based in Ontario, Canada. And it's a really stout, heavy-duty unit, and I'm really pleased with it. And the parts are all machined by a company in Abbotsford, British Columbia. And I went up and did a visit there some time ago and walked away very impressed with the quality of their production, attention to detail, their astuteness about metallurgy and how that all needs to be working as a part of a unit like this. So it's proven to be a very good, solid unit, and pleased with that. These lines are pump feed lines, and on the other side we'll show you in a moment the reservoir that keeps this thing alive and well. You'll also notice on the prop I've got a hub extension that contributes to our long nose profile. And that has worked well. I'm pleased with the result just for the aesthetics, and that it allowed me to design a cowling that's very aerodynamic and sleek, and frankly, it looks cool as well. But this is a custom composite spinner and backing plate. Then we have the hydraulic propeller, and it's interesting. It's kind of a visual illusion, and I've had several people ask me why on earth I put such a short prop on there. Well, the reality is it's an 82-inch prop, but part of what is deceptive here is that the spinner is 18 inches wide, which is roughly twice, if not more, the width than a standard spinner. So it covers up a lot of the base of the blades, but also contributes to the sleek transition from the spinner into the cowling. The other thing that's kind of visually distracting is with the tips painted black, it kind of makes things look a little bit shorter. But in reality, this prop has a very deep chord to the blade, much more than you'll see on most. And so I'm pulling just under 1,300 pounds of thrust in the tests that we've done. And it just pulls very strong. And then as you can see, prop clearance with the tail on the ground is approaching 36 inches. And in a level takeoff attitude, once we get the tail up, I still have 22 inches of clearance. So we're really in good shape for any debris on the ground, or for people that are operating on floats to avoid picking up a lot of spray and eroding the prop that way. We'll continue on here. This is the baffled reservoir for the PSRU, and it has baffling, which is important, that helps dissipate the foaming that always occurs with systems that are geared like this. And if I keep it at a certain level, the foaming takes care of itself really well, and we don't get any overflow. If I fill it up a little bit more, then it'll spit that out, but it maintains a constant level, and that has worked out really well. I'm driving, obviously, a vacuum pump here. The gauges I have on the panel are all steam gauges for a couple reasons. I had them, and also I put an HSI in there because if I decide to do some light IFR, I wanted to have a legal HSI, so I'm using this vacuum pump to drive that. And you can see these are all driven by a Gates belt off of the back, off of an independent PTO that's connected directly to the gearbox. So that's that. Here we have our starter, obviously. Here we have an adapter plate to fit our mount. So like I said, we might be adjusting this just a little bit, but otherwise that mount configuration is great. The radiator is a Ron Davis custom built radiator. Thankfully, it's working very efficiently for us, and very pleased with all of that. Then this is a wideband O2 sensor that I installed after we had done our initial flight testing. What that's been allowing me to do is collect some really good data through the SDS electronic management system. So we could then do very, very precise air-fuel ratio mixtures, and we can adjust those for every 250 RPM from idle up to redline. And that's taken a long time to get those exactly right, so we now have some really good proprietary information that we will program in for our customers so that we know that not only the air-fuel ratio is correct where it needs to be, but it also has a big impact, obviously, on EGTs. And my EGT is running between 1,300 and 1,350. And these engines will tolerate more than that, but that's just kind of a comfort zone for me, so I like to keep it there. So a couple of relays here that operate fuel pumps. We have another relay that operates the thermostat for the radiator. And there's a fan, as you probably noticed, on the radiator. One of the things I did, just as kind of a precautionary just in case thing, is that the radiator fan draws about 14 amps. And that's a big load if you lose electrical power. So I put in a dedicated circuit breaker so that I can disable that in flight. The likelihood is this fan is not operating in flight anyway because we've got so much good updraft airflow through here. It's not necessary. But the only time I hear the fan running is on a shutdown on a very, very warm day after taxiing a bit. It'll come on and help keep things cool and circulate. But my liquid coolant temperature on the engine, once the engine is warmed up, is always pegged at 176 degrees Fahrenheit, whether I'm taxiing, climbing, cruising, or descending. And by the way, I did an interesting experiment the other day. with regard to the potential for shock cooling. I was flying at about 12.5 and needed to come down quite a ways, so I thought, well, we'll give this a shot and see. So I pulled my manifold pressure back from about, I think I was cruising at about 20 inches, and pulled it back to about 12. And it allowed me to come downhill well over 1,000 feet a minute and keep myself in the green, out of the yellow as far as airspeed, and the temperature didn't change a degree. It just stayed very solid at 176. So that's one of the features that I was looking to accomplish in this application, and one of the things, frankly, that interested me, because I've spent a lifetime flying normally aspirated twins and turbocharged and pressurized twins, and always fighting the supercooling issue, trying to get downhill, because we have a lot of tall rocks around here. Many of you fly in mountainous areas, and you know the challenges in getting down. So this is working very well for that application. So hopefully that gives you a pretty good idea of what we've done and why we've done it. Air filter here is actually a Jegs filter. It took quite a while and a lot of research, frankly, to come up with a filter that would fit in those tight quarters and give us the capacity that we need. And then you can see behind that there's a reservoir, which is the coolant reservoir on the firewall, and then on the other side of that, I forgot to point out, there's an overflow tank. And typically when the engines cool, that overflow tank has anywhere from 1/2 inch to 1 inch of coolant exposed in the bottom, and there's a fair amount of expansion with the coolant when under operation, so it'll come up 2-3 inches. So we need that capacity there to handle that. But then once the engine cools down, it draws back into the system. So hopefully that gives you a good overview and an idea of what we've done, why we've done it, and always welcome any other questions.